starts with a phone call you don't make. You're 34 years old, sitting in a glass office on the 47th floor, and the governor of a state with 12 million people is waiting on hold for you. Not because you called him, because he called you and your assistant put him on hold, and nobody told him how long he'd be waiting, and he's still there, waiting. Because that's what people do when they need something from you. You pick up after 11 minutes, not 10, not 15, 11, because round numbers feel accidental. 11 feels deliberate. Governor, you say, what can I do for you? But you already know. You knew 3 days ago when your analyst flagged the infrastructure bill moving through his legislature, the one that would reroute a highway directly through land you've been quietly acquiring for 2 years. You've already run the numbers. You've already made the calls. By the time the governor finishes explaining his ask, you've already decided your answer. You just let him talk, because letting people finish is the most powerful thing you can do. See, most people think controlling politicians looks like what you see in the movies. Briefcases, backroom deals, envelopes passed under tables in dark restaurants. That's amateur hour. What you do is quieter, cleaner, and completely, technically, legal. You don't bribe anyone, you donate. You donate to campaigns, to PACs, to think tanks that produce white papers, to universities that produce the economists who write the white papers, to media companies that amplify the economists, and to the consultants who explain all of it to the politicians who then believe they arrived at the idea themselves. By the time a senator stands at a podium and announces a policy position, that position has traveled through 6 layers of your money before it reached his mouth, and he has absolutely no idea. That's not corruption. That's called architecture. You didn't start with money. That's the part people get wrong. You started with information. At 26, you were running a mid-sized data analytics firm, nothing special, mostly insurance contracts, when you figured something out that changed everything. Politicians don't make decisions based on what's right. They don't even make decisions based on what's popular. They make decisions based on what's safe. Safe means funded. Safe means supported. Safe means that if they vote yes on something, someone with resources has their back when the backlash comes. All you had to do was become the person who made them feel safe. So you started small, a $50,000 donation to a county commissioner race nobody cared about. You backed the guy who lost, on purpose, because you knew he'd run again, and you knew he'd remember. 2 years later, he won, and he owed you a favor before he'd ever cast a single vote. You did that 47 times over the next 6 years, 47 people in local and state offices across 9 states. All of them believing they got there on their own. All of them quietly aware that one phone call helped when it mattered most. You built a bench before you needed players. By the time you hit your first billion, the infrastructure was already in place. You have a chief of staff who does nothing but track legislation in 14 states, not to react to it, to anticipate it. You know what's going to be introduced before the bill is drafted because you know which lobbyists are meeting with which staffers, and you know because you pay 3 of those staffers former colleagues who now work for you. It's not a conspiracy, it's a calendar, a very well-managed calendar. And when something moves that affects your interests, you don't pick up the phone and threaten anyone. You simply redirect resources. A think tank releases a study, a few influential journalists receive embargoed data, a trade association sends a letter signed by 200 small business owners, 2 former senators, both on your advisory board at $400,000 a year, make appearances on cable news to explain why the bill, as written, needs more work. The bill stalls, gets sent back to committee, dies quietly in an election year when nobody has the political capital to revive it. No threats, no crimes, no fingerprints, just outcomes. The thing nobody tells you about this level of power is how boring it gets. You're not sitting in a leather chair stroking a cat. You're in meetings, endless meetings with lawyers, analysts, communications directors, and political consultants who all speak in a language designed specifically to obscure what they're actually saying. But occasionally, something real happens. 3 years ago, a junior senator from a Midwestern state decided he was going to make a name for himself by going after tech consolidation. He was smart, telegenic, and genuinely angry. Not performed anger, real anger, the kind that doesn't negotiate. He started talking about your acquisitions specifically, named your company in 2 committee hearings. The press picked it up. For about 6 weeks, he was everywhere. Your team came to you with options, the usual toolkit: opposition research, donor pressure, a primary challenger, a well-timed news cycle to bury his story. You said no to all of it. Instead, you called him directly. He answered because he was surprised you called. You asked if you could meet, privately, no stuff, no record. He agreed because politicians always agree to meetings with people who have resources, even the ones who hate those people, especially those people. You sat across from him in a conference room for 2 hours. You didn't defend yourself, you listened. You asked questions. You told him, honestly, that some of what he was saying was right, that consolidation in your sector had created real problems for real people, that you'd been thinking about it too. Then you told him you'd be willing to fund a policy institute, independently run, with him on the advisory board, to study the issue and propose real solutions. He left that meeting thinking he'd won something. What he actually did was step off the battlefield and into your ecosystem. The institute was real, the research was real, but the framing, the scope, the timing of every report, all of it ran through people you trusted. He got a platform. You got oversight of the narrative. He still mentions that meeting as the moment you showed him a different way. He doesn't know there was never another way being offered. Here's what power at this level actually feels like. It doesn't feel like control. It feels like gravity. You're not pulling people towards you. You've simply become a mass large enough that things orbit you naturally. Decisions bend in your direction the way light bends around something dense enough. Not because you push, because you are. Presidents come and go. You've operated through 4 of them, 2 of each party. Every single administration has had, at some point, someone in a senior position who came from your world, your companies, your foundations, your network. Not planted, just there. Because where else would they come from? You've been funding the institutions that produce senior policy people for 20 years. You don't choose administrations, you season them. But there's a night, there's always a night, when it catches up to you. It's 1 a.m. and you're alone in the house because your family's at the property in Colorado and you stayed behind for a meeting that ran long. The house is very quiet. Houses this large are always quiet in a way that feels wrong, like something is missing from the air. You're reading a report your security team put together. A journalist, young, somewhere in her early 30s, has been making calls, not to your PR department, to people from your past. Early investors, former employees, a city councilman from 15 years ago who got a donation right before he changed his vote on a zoning variance. She's not writing a business profile. She's building a map. Your security director says she's been at it for 8 months, that she's thorough, that she has a source inside one of your legal entities who has been leaking documents. He asks you how you want to handle it, and you sit there for a moment, longer than you've paused on anything in years. Because here's the thing, you've run this calculation before. You know exactly what you can do. You can make her story unpublishable through the outlet's ownership structure. You can surface old information about her that technically doesn't constitute defamation to print, but makes editors nervous. You can have the source identified and quietly let the source know they've been identified, which communicates everything without saying anything. You can do all of that before sunrise. But this time, sitting in a house that's too quiet, you find yourself thinking about something one of your old professors said 30 years ago. The most dangerous person in any system isn't the one who breaks the rules. It's the one who rewrites them to make sure nothing they do counts as breaking. You think about whether that was a warning or a blueprint. You're still not sure. You pick up the phone. You tell your security director to stand down. Not because you've grown a conscience, not because you're afraid, because you've realized something about the journalist that your team missed. She's not trying to expose you. She's trying to understand you. And understanding you is so much more dangerous than anything she could publish. Because if she understands you, really understands how the whole structure works, she could explain it to people in a way that makes them feel the full weight of what it means. Not angry, not outraged, just clear. And clarity, in your experience, is the one thing money has never been able to buy for very long. You make a different call. You call her editor, not to threaten, but to offer an interview. On the record, no conditions, no pre-approved questions. You, for 3 hours, talking to her directly. The editor is silent for a long moment. Then he asks why, and you say something you've never said out loud before. Because I'd rather be understood than feared. Fear fades, understanding lasts. What you don't say, what you're thinking as the words leave your mouth, is that you've already had 3 lawyers read every document your source could possibly have access to, that the interview will be the most controlled, uncontrolled conversation ever recorded, that by giving her something, you take away her reason to dig for everything. The interview runs 4 months later, 20,000 words. It wins an award. It describes you as complicated, brilliant, and operating in a space where the law was written too slowly to catch up. Not criminal, not corrupt. Complicated. You read it twice. You keep a printed copy in your desk. You're 61 now. 3 more billion added since that night. 2 more administrations. 1 global crisis that your logistics infrastructure helped manage, which got you a private call of thanks from a head of state you'd never directly funded, but whose chief of staff spent 4 years at your foundation right after grad school. The system holds. It always holds. Because you didn't build something fragile. You built something that looks like the background, and nobody dismantles the background. Nobody even sees it. Somewhere right now, a 28-year-old is sitting in a city council meeting getting their first small amendment passed. They think it's because their argument was compelling. It was compelling because your organization trained the advocacy group that briefed them, who trained with the policy institute you funded, who built their curriculum on research from a university chair your foundation endowed. That 28-year-old will be in a state house in 6 years, maybe federal office in 12. And they'll get there thinking every step was their own. You were never in that room. You were never anywhere near it. But the path they walked, you paved it.